From Napa Valley Wine Academy, this is The Stories Behind Wine, a podcast dedicated to the stories, people, places, and history that influence the world of wine. I'm Christian Oggenfuss, and in this episode, we bring you an interview with Stephen Spurrier, a giant in the world of wine, a champion of French wine, an author, a merchant, and a vintner. However, one of his most memorable achievements was the organization of the Judgment of Paris in 1976, which brought global attention to California wine, particularly the wines from Napa Valley. It goes without saying that it is unlikely there would be a Napa Valley Wine Academy without Stephen Spurrier. Stephen inspired me through one of his early ventures, the Académie de Vin Wine School in Paris, to dream about launching my own project, which became Napa Valley Wine Academy. This interview with Stephen Spurrier and Napa Valley Wine Academy partner Peter Marks, Master of Wine, was recorded as a webinar with a discussion prior to Stephen's passing. We hope you enjoy the discussion about Stephen's book, A Life in Wine, tasting wines, and the lengthy Q&A. The video version of this interview is available through Napa Valley Wine Academy's membership. More information in the show notes or at napavalleywineacademy.com. And if you're interested in purchasing a copy of A Life in Wine by Stephen Spurrier, visit our website, Napa Valley Wine Academy, or see the link in our show notes. Enjoy the interview. Cheers.
So tell us a little bit about this new memoir that you have written, Your Life in Wine.
I think probably the key thing is, I don't know whether people can see it on the screen, that's the book. When I wrote the first edition 2 or 3 years ago, it really was a memoir, and it was called Wine, A Way of Life. And it was very relaxed, and I wouldn't say it was self-indulgent, but I was just putting the kind of life I had down on paper. And I must confess, it was not very well edited. It didn't have an index. It could have been tightened up. Anyway, I think I sold more copies personally than the publishers did. And eventually, it needed. But anyway, with having founded on Hugh Johnson's encouragement, the Academy of Wine Library, with Simon McMurtry, and a big investment from the International Wine and Spirit Competition, to bring back the literature of wine, which I told Hugh we'd lost. I asked Hugh, we were having lunch in his club in St. James's, which is long, and I said, Hugh, we were brought up on books like titles like The Wayward Tendrils of the Vine and Stay Me with Flagons and that's literature. It's historic. What's happened to them? Gone, old boy, he said, gone. We must republish them. So nobody could be more thrilled than me that the book which came out just before mine was the re-edition of Hugh's book, The Story of Wine, which, inconceivably had been out of print for 20 years. And he hasn't altered a word in it. He's written a wonderful introduction. But he said, and it kind of stops, actually, it stops very soon after the Judgment of Paris. It stops in 1979. And so that our very first book was Michael Broadbent's Wine Tasting Celebration Edition, because that's where the Académie de Vin and everything all started. And we've got eight books on the shelves at the moment, and another 4 planned for next year. We wrote a very good book. I think it's very good, and it's had tremendous reception, called On Bordeaux. And the strap title is Tales of the Unexpected from the World's Most Famous Wine Region. And we are now preparing for publishing probably in September on California. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether that's going to be Tales of the Unexpected or not. But we're very thrilled we got Randall Graham, we got a whole bunch of people. Anyway, so that's it. We got 4 books planned for next year. But anyway, I'm thrilled with the Académie de Vin library. And I'm really thrilled they published this book because it's much more serious. And I've added another chapter to take me up the last couple of years, and it makes much more sense. So I'm very proud of it.
I think we are all looking forward to reading that. That should be wonderful.
But it's still very personal, and it's full of other people, because the people I met and wines I tasted. I mean, when I was in Bordeaux and Burgundy in the 1960s, I was meeting Louis Latour Senior, the grandfather of the Chronicle Louis Latour. I was meeting Jacques Calvet. I was meeting people, and I still meet their grandchildren. So it does prove that wine is a kind of family business, but I was thrown in suddenly. Well, I threw myself in, going to the wine regions and working with, as a trainee, the suppliers to the company I was working for in London as a trainee. And they were old-fashioned and they were aristocratic, nothing wrong with that. But I learned so much. I learned really, I mean, it was an extraordinary experience, quite extraordinary. And when Louis Jaboulet, this was in 1965, when I had my last dinner with friends and the lady who subsequently became my wife and two of her girlfriends, he offered us a bottle of La Chapelle 61. So that doesn't happen to everybody.
Yeah, that sounds great. So today we're tasting some Burgundy wines. Why did you select Burgundy for this occasion?
Well, I think Burgundy is beginning to represent, is now representing really good value for money. And we all know that the Grand Cru, Musini, Chambertin, all that kind of stuff are completely out of price. We see the auction prices, we can't afford them. Similarly, some Premier Cru are very, very expensive. But there's a bit of a swing back from that. And the COVID crisis is helping that. But you have to think that Burgundy is a very big region. It starts in Chablis and it goes all the way down to Mâcon and the Beaujolais. Now, obviously, you don't have Pinot Noir in the Beaujolais. And if you want to be really purist, and we are purists tonight because we've only got Côte d'Or and Côte Charneuse wines. But Chablis is a unique wine. There's nothing that, people can compare that wine to Chablis, but Chablis is unique from its Kimmeridgian Portlandian soil. It's a northern vineyard. It's only 30 or 40 kilometers south of Champagne. It's vibrant. It's mineral. And even a straight Chablis from the co-op is about 12 to 13 English pounds on the shelves here. And a good Premier Cru Chablis, which if you drink it at 2 or 3 years old, it's a splendid wine, is 20 pounds. So it's, and even the Grand Cru, I mean, not Ravenot, of course, but even the Grand Cru are in the 40s and 50s. So Chablis is really a benchmark wine. And then you go right down, still talking about white wine, you go right down to the Mâconnais and Puy-Fouissé. And Puy-Fouissé has just had 12 vineyards classified as Premier Cru. So they're going very much the Chablis. Well, they've been after that for some time, but there are now 12 vineyards classified as Premier Cru, and they are the best vineyards. And a Puy-Fouissé Premier Cru will not be more than 25 English pounds, maybe $35. And it's much richer. Of course, it's a good 200 kilometers, 250 kilometers further south than Chablis. And if you're in that part of the world, you've got the Roman tiles on the houses, you feel you're moving towards Provence. I mean, but Puy-Fouissé is one of the great classic wines. And Mâcon Blanc, Mâcon is wonderful. I mean, I often find Puy-Fouissé a bit rich for me, but Anne-Claude Leflèvre, sadly died, Anne-Claude Leflèvre had vineyards in Mâcon, Camp-Lafon, but basically the Mâcon wines, most of them having a name of a village, Mâcon-Perron, Mâcon this, Mâcon that, they're fantastic value. And they're a really beautiful expression of Chardonnay. So that's two expressions of Chardonnay in the north and the south. And then, of course, you have the Chardonnays in the Côte d'Or, which we're not going to talk about, but they are the classic white Burgundies. And then coming on to the reds, there's very little red wine in the Chablis region. There's a lovely vineyard called Irancy, which is just south of Auxerre. And they used to grow, they now plant mostly Pinot Noir, but they had a marvelous grape variety called the César. And I think, if you have grape varieties called César, you're on a winning streak. But it's a very nervous, rather kind of edgy red wine, but it's much better drunk on the spot with a jambon persier outside a cafe. But Irancy is just it's a country wine. Okay, but then as soon as you hit the northern Côte de Nuit, Marsanne, Sauvin Pataille, for instance, and the Haute Côte de Nuit, you have true Pinot Noir. And I think global warming is 20 or 30 years ago, the wines from the Haute Côte de Nuit and the Haute Côte de Beaune, the Haute Côte, because they're high slopes, they're higher than the classic slopes along the Route Nationale. They often had trouble ripening, and now they don't. So I mean, I think the Haute Côte, for somebody looking for bargains, you look for an Haute Côte de Nuit, Haute Côte de Beaune. Of course, the best bargain to look for in Burgundy, and Jancis Robinson is never stops talking about it, and she's quite right, is that almost every top domain in Burgundy makes a Bourgogne Rouge. Mm-hmm. Not everyone, but I mean, basically half of them do. And a Bourgogne Blanc. If they happen to be in a white wine area, they'll make a Bourgogne Blanc. And that means that they've got vineyards on the wrong side of the tracks. It's not a declassification from it could be, but it's generally not a declassification from the appellation. It's a straight appellation, Bourgogne Rouge and Bourgogne Blanc. And that is made by the same hands and farmed by the same people as their Premier Cru and maybe their Grand Cru. So that's the entry level in the sense that Bordeaux has the Cru Bourgeois. Well, Bordeaux has Bordeaux Superior, and they have wonderful wines in Fransac and the Côte de France. And there's a lot of wine in Bordeaux, which is totally affordable and very, very good. But there's something magic about Pinot Noir. Everyone knows it. Once you're hooked, you're hooked. And you can get the real thing with Bourgogne Pinot Noir and Bourgogne Chardonnay. And then, of course, you have the village wines. And then, so we've got what we've got. We've got a wine from the Côte Chalonnaise, which is the southern vineyard, and the most southern vineyard in Burgundy, and the wine from the Côte de Beaune, which is around Beaune, and the wine from the Côte de Nuit. So that's.
Yeah, should we talk about what the wines are, and maybe we can start discussing them? These are all from Joseph Favely. Favely is one of the finest producers in Burgundy, from both a negociant as well as the domain producer. There are also 3 wines from the 2017 vintage. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, which was an outstanding vintage. The 3 wines are the Mercure Clos Ronde, which I have right there, the Volnay Saint-Tenot, which is Premier Cru, and then finally the Gevrey Chambertin Vievine from
the domain wine. Yeah.
Some nice old wine. So the order which we should taste would be.
Should taste them first, yeah. Okay.
In that order. Okay.
I mean, just a word about the 17 vintage. It was a very ripe vintage, and it was luckily a vintage which didn't have many spring frosts. So it was a vintage that everyone was really happy with, and it's just kind of emerging on the market now. At the wonderful Oregon McMinnville Pinot Noir celebration last year, I was the keynote speaker, and I was asked to choose a theme, and they wanted me to speak on Burgundy because they have so much Pinot Noir, and so I chose the Côte Chalonnaise, and the theme was the Côte Chalonnaise, the third Côte, which had always historically been kind of left behind, rather like the younger cousin, nice, but, we don't really talk about him. And so we had wines from Aube de Vilaine, we had wines from Louis Jadot, we had wines from the Chateau de Mercure, and we had wines from Roulet, from Jean Claude Boisset. And they were fantastic. It was a huge success. Not only did the wine show wonderfully, but the panel I had Thibaut Gaget, who was Pierre-Henri Gaget's son, and the Jadot family have just bought a substantial domain in Oregon. He was on the panel. The winemaker for Boisset was there. The owner of Chateau de Chamaret in Mercury was there. So I had a wonderful panel who were tasting their own wines. And what came across is not only were the wines good and really very good to drink, but also value for money, everyone accepted, but value for pleasure really hit the spot. Because they're wines which, it's not that they're uncomplicated, but they're kind of easier of access than the more complex wines from the Côte de Beaune. So Mercury Côte, now Fairvalley, as a company, always had quite big holdings, and I'm talking 20, 30 years ago, in the Côte de Nuit. They had a nice plot of Courtranche-Charlemagne, but they also had quite a lot of land in Mercury. And I know they've got 2 or 3 monopoles. This is a monopole, which means they own the entire vineyard. One is the Claude Miglon, I don't know. But anyway, so this is one I don't know. So they must have just bought it. And I know that the Fairvalley family has been buying vineyards in a very sensible way recently.
And by the way, this wine in the United States retails for about $30.
Yeah.
A fabulous bargain. I've always felt the wines from Côte Chalonnais have been just undervalued, underappreciated. Maybe after this webinar, people will be buying more of them for sure.
Well, I mean, I think also they last. I mean, I've got some 2012s in my cellar, and they're still very good. But I mean, the color, I'm just reading my notes: fine, deep, carmine red, light, fresh on the rim, red, black cherries, and summer red fruits on the nose. A touch of earthy florality, if such a thing exists. Good, vibrant fruit on the palate. Still a little green, but natural richness is there, and the smoothness will come out by Easter. Very good Mercury. And you can sense the vitality, the vibrancy. It's quite lean. It's quite vertical as a wine. When we go onto the Volnay is spherical. The Volnay is very rounded.
Yeah. There's a little bit of ripeness in this wine, and a testament to the vintage. But as you said, there's a real brightness and a freshness, both ripe but also tart red fruits that are dominant in the wine.
No, exactly. I mean, I like it. If I had that in my cellar, I would drink it. It's in a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
But I do tend to drink my wines with a certain age, because I got a very cold cellar. My cellar is today at 8 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
89. So it averages 10 over the year. So the wines do mature very slowly. But that is also, it leaves a wonderful flavor on the palate, a flavor of that actually you can remember.
Absolutely.
It's a single vineyard, and Clos Ron, I don't know where it is, but I mean, it will be a walled-in vineyard, because the Clos is always walled in, and therefore the vines will probably be quite old. I think it's a marvelous wine.
Yeah, looking at the notes here, some of the vines are dating back to the 1970s, 73, 78, 84. Yep. I also like the focus on the fruit on this wine too. It's really it's a Formont.
It's Côte.
Yeah, and they do have some oak on this one. The notes say it's been
I noted
French oak, but only 10% was new, so it doesn't really influence the wine from a.
I just noted after the tasting, and I tasted them before lunch today. I said 3 very good Burgundies, and totally true to their origin. Classic hands-off winemaking, and the use of oak is only present in the length and balance.
Yeah,
but on all those 3 wines, there's impeccable use of oak, absolutely impeccable. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And
hey, I'm just thinking about back to the judgment of Paris. Obviously, you were surprised with the results and with both the white and red flight.
Yeah.
Were you more surprised though with the Stag's Leap Wine Cellars Cabernet winning the red flight, or are you more surprised by the Chateau Montelena beating the white Burgundies?
My bet on the 24th of May, 76 was Chalon for the whites and Ridge for the reds.
Uh-huh.
So, and so I'm happy to say that of the 9 judges, 6 voted Montelena top and 3 voted Chalon top. Not a single judge voted for a Grand Cru or a Premier Cru white Burgundy. Then I think, because we announced the results of the whites while we were clearing them up and beginning to serve the reds, I think, even though there wasn't shock horror on the result of the whites, several people in the panel were determined that it wouldn't happen again. And when they came across a wine which is evidently Californian, like Mike Hammer's, certain tasters gave it 4 out of 20, which of course you don't do. I mean, it's so. I think there was an element of there was an element that let's make sure we vote for French wine this time. And it has always occurred to me that Stag's Leap Wine Cellars did very good. It was 4-year-old vines, and it was so young. It tasted French, but it just tasted so good. And the complaints were the Cru Classé were too young to taste, and so we did it in 10 years' time, and we proved that wrong. We did it in 30 years' time. We proved it totally wrong. But I think that the Bordeaux wines lacked a bit of fruit, with the exception of Mouton. Mouton was always the top Bordeaux. And I think the fruit in Warren Winiarski's Stag's Leap Wine Cellars came through. And it snuck through. I've done the numbers. Everyone has complained over the years. The numbers don't add up. But they do, because I've taken each individual judge's score. And so the ones that put, it comes through on the vote. And so, I was surprised. I simply could not imagine that a wine from California would beat the Mouton, Aubryon, Montrose, and Les Velasquez that I put up. And that wasn't actually the point. What Patricia Gallagher and I were after was recognition for the quality coming out of California. And we would have been totally happy, I'm sure, if we got a 3rd and a 5th. We would have been unhappy if we had nothing in the top 5. But we didn't expect that result. And I think it's a result which was a win-win situation, wine in the wine world, because Europeans went to California, particularly the Bordelais, went to California to see what was going on. They saw huge investment. There was very little investment in France in those days because the chateaus, even the Premier Cru, weren't making money. They were not, and also the landlords were kind of absent. I mean, it was not that they were resting on their laurels, but California was trying its damnedest, and France was not putting the shoulder quite behind the wheel that it might have done if they'd had more money to invest. And so, I think it's not a coincidence that the first vintage of Opus 1 was 1979. And I know that Robert Mondavi and Baron Philippe met before 76. But I think what convinced Baron Philippe was the Judgment of Paris, that basically there was something to do in California.
A wake-up call.
Yeah. Well, as Urbain de Villaine said, he said it in rather more disruptive terms. He said it was a bon coup dans le derrière pour les vins français. Good kick in the pants for French wine. But it was. And what it does, and I always say, and I'll say it again, the great importance of the Judgment of Paris was that it created a template whereby lesser-known wines of quality could be tasted blind against well-known wines of quality. And if the judges themselves were of quality, the opinion of the judges would be respected. Yeah. And that really leveled the playing field. That opened the gates where you've seen the Berlin tasting, Eduardo Chadwick, and so on and so forth, it kind of opened the gates. It made comparative tastings respectable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you've always been a champion of wines from wherever they come, as long as they're beautiful wines.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I must confess, I'm very European in my wine selections. France and then certainly Italy, particularly Tuscany. But I mean, in my career, certainly when I began working for Decanter back in the early 90s, you go to all these tastings, and there are sort of new world wines all over the place. So you taste brand new wines you've never even heard of. And so, I was in Romania last year. There's some lovely wines there. Lovely.
So next May 24th will be the 45th anniversary of the Judgment of Paris, and you're involved in some of the planning for the Judgment of Napa, which will take place here in Napa. Well, looking at modern examples, not the old wines again, but wines from new producers.
Angela is doing a fantastic job. I met her and her colleagues when I was at Anthony Dye's Blue San Francisco Wine Competition in November last year or October last year. And I think it's amazing what she's doing. She's doing it at the
Culinary Institute.
Yeah.
Culinary Institute of America. Yep.
And then she's got pop-ups, I think, in 6 cities with Spurrier and now I'm not going to be a part of that. I should be a part of it in spirit and a part of it. Obviously, there'll be a photograph of me on the screen or something like that. But I told Angela that I didn't want to be present because what she's doing, she's moving the Judgment of Paris into 2021, where it was supposed to be 2020. And I think if I'm there, everyone is going to think back to 1976. And I don't think that's the point. So I shall be very much there in spirit and fascinated to see how the selection of wines that she's chosen turn out. But I mean, I think it's something, and also I think it's Judgment of Paris, well, it's not the Judgment of Paris, it's a Judgment of Napa. It's an individual thing. It stands on its own feet. But I should be glued to the results when they come out.
Right. Yeah. Again, people who are interested in finding more about that, the Cultured Vine is the website. And you will be there in the sense that your Bride Valley sparkling wine will be served, right?
Yeah.
That's great. So we taste the go ahead. I'm sorry. The Volnay, yes.
No, the Volnay, the color is sensational. I mean, it's a very rich, almost velvety color. This is a marvelous wine. And when I said it's almost spherical, you can sense the roundness. Volnay, the vineyards of Centenot are actually in Meursault. They're in north of Meursault. And so people like Dominique Lafont Dominique Lafont is renowned to have the best Volnay Centenot du Milieu from the middle of the vineyard. But I love Volnay Centenot because it's rounder and a little bit more supple than a lot of Volnays, because the Clos de Chêne and the Clos des Angles can be, quite not tough. But I mean, Volnay is a wine which needs a bit of time, and I think the fact the vineyards are north of Meursault, but they're allowed to be called Volnay, gives them that little suppleness. I mean, okay, here are my notes. Fine ruby red, lovely, smooth, almost velvety looking. Pronounced spice on the nose and deep red black fruits already beginning to open up with firm yet rich Pinot Noir fruit on the palate. Definitely Volnay, not Parma, not Beaune. And the richness of Centenot is very evident. Could be drunk now, but much better kept, 23 to 32. A really good wine, purity and depth and origin. I mean, that's very good.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, your note is perfect. The wine shows a little more of the dark fruit character compared to the Mercure, and as you said, a little bit richer, more body, more roundness. The oak is still very much a complementary aspect, but there's a little bit of a smoky or toasty spice but certainly the fruit is showing the foremost.
If you drank it now, it would be a pity.
Well, I'm afraid I'm have to drink mine tonight. It's delicious.
Me too. But it's a very good wine. It's a very, very good wine, and I think it shows a side of winemaking that Fairvalley did not have 10 years ago. They wouldn't have made wines with that suppleness, with that roundness. The wines are really quite austere. So,
and the reason for that change?
Well, I mean, I think generation Erwan, François Fairvalley's son, took over. They took a lady winemaker. I'm not saying it has a female touch, but there was a lot of change. A lot of change. François Fairvalley, his wines were really quite old-fashioned. They were very pure and true to their origin, but they were maybe they'd spent a little too long in wood, I don't know. But I never, apart from the Mercurys, I never really liked the Fairvalley Côte de Bain and Côte de Nuits as much as I do now. And now I absolutely love them. And this is a remarkable range.
Yeah. A lot of freshness in these wines from what I remember compared to the best.
You said it was $100. Well, you
90 to 100 retail in the United States.
You compare that to what you can get a California Pinot Noir. What's Raj Par's Pinot Noir?
Yeah, I can't afford it. I don't know. I have to look it up.
Yeah, but I mean,
you're right.
I think it's so classic. It's the best wine of the three. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. But the Gevrey is very interesting because
let's move on to that. This is the Vieille Vigne, so it's made from some older vines. In fact, the notes that I have here say vineyards that are planted in 1945, 1950, 51, 56, 62, 67. The youngest are 1969.
That's amazing. Well, Mark Bingley, who runs MND, your fellow master of wine, told me that the Fairvalley family had bought this domain of old vines, and it wasn't a very famous domain because they were selling their grapes. So no one actually knew the name. He said these are going to be the best value from Fairvalley because they're really old vines and they'll treat them as a domain wine. And when you look at the vineyards that Fairvalley has in the Côte de Nuits, La Tricia, Chambertin, Clos de Berge, Chambertin, all that kind of stuff, they know exactly what they're doing up there. And this I really liked, and I'm really surprised when you said it's $60 or something like that.
Thereabouts, yep.
So my notes: fine ruby red, less velvety looking than the Volnay, perhaps more vibrant, younger on the rim, both concentrated and yet still subdued autumn fruits on the nose. Earthy spices there, good vigorous Côte de Nuit palate, old vines show in depth and natural concentration, and the Gevrey Chambertin spice remains. A serious wine of premier cru quality already beginning to open up. Probably bottled unfiltered, I thought. Not that it's murky or anything like that, but there's a certain sort of hint of unfilteredness about it.
Right. I love your comment there about the the structure of this wine, which does very much true to type for Gevrey Chambertin. It's got a little bit more of a backbone compared to the Volnay, which was really a little bit more rounder. And the spice in this wine, that sort of a earthy, spicy character.
Think of splitting wines into vertical and spherical. I mean, the Volnay is spherical, and the Gevrey is vertical.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. But I mean, as it should be, because it's got firmness. You don't expect Gevrey Chambertins to be supple and easy of access. Mm-hmm. I mean, they always should have a certain reserve to them.
Right. And that said, I would say this wine still is drinkable now. It would certainly benefit, but it's not a rustic wine. As you said, I think in the years past, this might have been a little more on the rustic side.
Bizarrely, it's the most drinkable of the three, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think the old vines really add to that, and they would have done very hands-off vinification. And I think that's, well, I'll certainly look out for it on the UK market.
Good. This is a point where maybe we should see if Christian has any questions that may be coming in from our audience. I'd love to see if they'd like to ask anything about you or any of your interests.
Yeah, of course. Always a lot of questions. So one is coming in from Bonnie, and she would like to know if there is any plans in the works for a documentary about your life story and the judgment of Paris specifically. So there has been Bottle Shock that analyzed one segment of it, but is there a true documentary in the works of your life story?
I think there is one being worked on, and it's being worked on by somebody called Christian, I can't remember his surname, and he's the California representative in China. And he's been doing a lot of interviews, and it's long-term. He's really interviewed Warren and people like that. I think there is a documentary in the works, but I think it will be a documentary just to record the fact. Mm-hmm. Which won't be a bad thing compared to Bottle Shock.
Yeah. It's better to read your book.
Yeah. Well, better to read George Tabor's book, because George Tabor's book is about California wine, and the Judgment of Paris just happens to be the meat in the sandwich, but it's basically about California wine.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great segue to the next question that was posed, and that is from Tony. And Tony would like to know, what is your feeling on the movie Bottle Shock and its accuracy?
Well, I got a copy of the script on hand, and it was defamatory about me, and it was complete rubbish. Its theme was that my shop in Paris was doing so badly, I had to hold this tasting to make my name famous. And in the shots in my shop in Paris, you have Alan Rickman playing me, who said, the Burgundians won't even sell me wine. Well, of course, it's totally untrue. So my son happens to be married she was then the head of BBC Films. So she put me in touch with an intellectual property lawyer in the movie business. And I sent him my comments on the script. He contacted Hollywood. The Hollywood producer's reply was, we didn't even know Mrs. Spurrier was still alive. So, they hadn't been paying much attention. Basically, the background to the story is that there was a plan to make a movie called The Judgment of Paris. And this was a kind of mom and pop Hollywood operation, and very small. And anyway, but the word got around, and I think Jim Barrett of Montelena realized that if there was a Judgment of Paris movie, it would only talk about Stag's Leap and not Montelena. You can't talk about two wines. So he plonked $1 million on the table and wrote his own script. And that's true. Mm. Or he financed a script to be written called Bottle Shock. But then, of course, it took me about a year to get around to seeing the movie. And I've now seen it quite a few times. And my wife says, Stephen, for Christ's sake, stop complaining. Who gets a movie made about them in the wine world? Nobody, not even Michael Robin. And who gets played by Alan Rickman? Nobody. And it just so happened that Alan and I had been in the same house party in Tuscany at Castello di Argiano in Montalcino over a couple of years, and we'd shared more than a glass together. And so he knew that I was not the person described in the script. I mean, he said when I dropped him a line and said, I've finally seen the movie, Alan, and thank you so much for playing me in such a sympathetic way. I reminded him I never wore a three-piece suit, but he always wore a three-piece suit. And he said, had we not met at Argiano with all our friends, it would have been very difficult because I wouldn't have known who you were. So I think and it's still, people still talk about it. If I have to say whether I prefer bottle shock to have been made or wish it hadn't been made, I much prefer that it's been made because people enjoy seeing it. And it tells the story. To a certain extent, it tells the story.
Great. Well, thank you. That was an incredible insight. And so we have David asking Stephen, first, he would like to know, when is the Queen going to grant you knighthood, number one? And second, what is the closest New World wine that reminds you in a blind tasting of Burgundy?
It's not in the Queen's gift, but I have been up for what's called an OBE, which is the Order of the British Empire, for some time, and I think that's fallen by the wayside. Hugh Johnson's an OBE, as his chances. To me, an Order of the British Empire doesn't mean very much to me. It means, of course, a lot in terms of being a member of the Order of the British Empire. But what I've done in my life has nothing to do with the British Empire. So I'm quite happy it's gone dormant. The New World wines most reminiscent of Burgundy, I guess that must be Oregon or South Africa. But then Tolpuddle, Michael Shaw Smith's Tolpuddle from Tasmania is brilliant Pinot Noir. It's reminding one of Burgundy and being brilliant Pinot Noir. I think I would pick Oregon.
Great. Yeah. We have a question from Francis, and Francis says, "What are your thoughts on domain wines versus negociant wines when it comes to high-end Burgundy?"
Well, I think negociant wines have never been better in the sense that you have the classic negociant, Drouhin, Jadot, Beverly, of course, Louis Latour, so on and so forth. They all have lots and lots and lots of domains. Bouchard, Perry-Fils, they have lots of domains, and they buy in grapes and they buy in wine and they do some blending. So they're not going to bring out a wine which is going to damage their reputation. So I think negociant Burgundies, which are plainly negociant and not domain Burgundies, can be bought without hesitation. But domain wines, then I think you have to know the domain. Now there are very few. Most of the domains are making very good wine at the moment, but they're always sort of one or two man bands, mini negociants, like Nicolas Patel with Domaine de Belen, and there are dozens of them who are buying in grapes from people they know and doing what is a negociant wine, because it's not a domain wine. So I think the recognition by buying a domain wine, if you follow domain Roumier or domain Lafont or domain this or domain the other, Chandon de Briaille, who I happen to like a lot, then you identify them. You identify with them. It's less easier to identify with a negociant. Now, even though I know Pierre-Henri Jadot very well, I know Robert Drouhin well, I know his sons, Veronique, I adore, but it's the label is not quite so personal, because the label on a Chandon de Briaille or a Domaine Doujac, for example, tells you something about the family. Mm-hmm. It tells you a lot about the vineyard. So I think the label on a domain wine holds a lot of information which the label on a negociant wine cannot.
Great. So another question from about Burgundy from Susan, and she asked, how would you compare the appellation level Gevrey-Chambertin to appellation level Nuits Saint-Georges?
Well, I think they're quite often compared, because Nuits Saint-Georges is the Côte de Nuit, and Gevrey-Chambertin is the biggest appellation in Burgundy, in the Côte de Nuit. The Nuits Saint-Georges wines are more robust. The Gevrey Chambertins have a little bit of spice. Nuits Saint-Georges maybe slightly more earthy. What's interesting is they're both very masculine wines. And then you go to Chambord. Vin Romanée is sort of masculine. It's pretty masculine, but it has a feminine edge. Chambord is quite feminine. Maurice Saint-Denis is probably masculine almost entirely. But I mean, the Gevrey Chambertin and Nuits Saint-Georges are structured wines. You take away the structure and you don't have the character. So I think a Chambord can live without structure. I mean, all wines need a certain structure to hold up. But you're not looking for structure, first of all, in a Chambord, or maybe not even in a Vin Romanée. But you are in Gevrey Chambertin and you are in Nuits Saint-Georges, particularly Nuits Saint-Georges.
Great. Audra asks, you'd mentioned Oregon and South Africa as two regions that produce great Pinot Noirs. Any specific producers that you favor in Oregon or South Africa for Pinot Noir?
Not because they change so often. I mean, Eben Sabi is one of the great producers in South Africa, but I don't know whether he does Pinot Noir, but if he did, I'd buy it. The Erie Vineyard, the classic, one of the first vineyards in Oregon, is still very classic. Domaine Drouin, Oregon, is absolutely spot on. No, I mean, I can't really quote specific top people.
Great. Let's see. Just filtering through questions here. One is a question about British Columbia and the Okanagan area. And what do you think about the Pinot Noirs coming from that area?
Well, I'm a big fan of British Columbia. I'm a big fan of the Okanagan Valley. I'm a big fan of almost everything that's done up there. The Chardonnays are very interesting. They got very good Viognier. They got even Petit Verdot. There's a French lady winemaker who makes wonderful Syrah. Pinot Noir, I think, is well, I mean, Jack Mayer, J.A.K. Mayer, whose wines I haven't tasted now for a few years, makes very good Pinot Noir. To me, it's a cool climate region, so there's no reason why they shouldn't make very good Pinot Noir. And I was just in, actually, British Columbia with Dave McIntyre from the Washington Post, and we would have tasted a lot of Pinot Noir. Right now, I can't put my finger on the names, but I mean, I think if you're looking for a cool climate grape variety, British Columbia is the place to look.
Great. And then we have a question from Audie, and Audie, more specifically about the wines that we've tasted. Can you remind us which one you found the most feminine? And then a follow-up question is, of these three, which one do you think has the best aging potential?
Well, I guess the only wine which I could possibly classify as having any femininity would be the Volnay, because it's wonderfully rich and smooth and it's welcoming and it's seductive. Okay. And I think that has the best aging potential. The Mercury is a slow burn. I think it'll come on stream at Easter. And I think 4 or 5 years for that is probably quite enough. And the Gevrey Chambertin, because I think they've used very little oak, and they really benefited from the old vines. The Gevrey Chambertin is really quite approachable. I would keep that 8-10 years, but I wouldn't mind if I discovered the Volnay Centenaire in 15 years' time.
Mm-hmm. So we one last question until I handed it back over to Peter, and one I found compelling is from Ken, and could you discuss your love of Pinot Noir when you juxtapose it against Cabernet and other varieties?
I think it's not easy because they're totally different profiles. They're totally different styles of wine. I mean, I wouldn't say They're as different as Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but they are very different styles of wine, and there's very little comparison. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're both red. Pinot Noir obviously has less tannin. I mean, I don't think you benefit by trying to find a comparison where there are no comparisons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very well said. Great, Peter. I'll handle it back over to you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, those are fabulous questions. I'm just curious, since you wrote this book, Your Life in Wine, I'm wondering, is there one aspect of your life, you've had many roles as a retailer, judge, writer, so on. Is there one particular role that you've enjoyed the most?
I think there are probably two. There are probably two periods in my life, my wine life, which were the most fun and the most exciting. The first was from maybe 1971 to 1978 in Paris, with buying the shop, getting it going, opening La Canopée du Vin, all that kind of stuff. And in 78, I expanded out of my comfort zone by buying a restaurant and then another restaurant. That was very stupid. And then I went to New York, and that was even more stupid. So that the period 71 to 78, 77, 78 was just magic. And my kids, well, my son was born in 71, my daughter in 73. They grew up in Paris. They spoke French before they spoke English. We had a lovely flat near the Bastille. It was a really great time. And then I think, without any doubt, joining Decanter. And I joined Decanter in 1994 and I was already a good friend of Sarah Camp, but I became, along with Hugh Johnson and Michael Broadbent, one of the three Decanter boys, so to speak. And there's a chapter in my book called Life with Decanter, and that was extraordinary because Decanter was the calling card. I used to have my own visiting cards, Stephen Spurrier, wine consultant. I threw those away. I just had Decanter cards because Decanter made so much more impact. And so working for a magazine where you're free to talk about what you want, you're free to give your opinion, you're almost encouraged to be not confrontational, but to be sort of interesting. And you go to tastings every single day of the week, so to speak. It was fascinating. And I left Decanter with great regret. My goodbye to Decanter letter was in the May edition, just because, it was time to turn the page. But so Decanter, early days in Paris and Decanter.
You didn't mention Bride Valley. What do you?
Well, Bride Valley
still a work in progress, or you feel good about that?
Bride Valley is where I live, and my wife bought this property back in '87, and we're just renovating a falling down shed for an art studio for her, and we're doing the pruning. We're on our 5th day of pruning. Bride Valley is most exciting. We've just launched a club, Bride Valley Club, because we want to throw our net a little bit wider than Dorset, where we are. And also, we need to sell directly to the public obviously, the members will get a 15% discount on the cellar door price, but we need to build up a local, direct clientele. And that's what we're doing. And it's most exciting because people come here and I always pop in and say hello. And there's a very definite connection between wine and art. I've created next door to the tasting room, a wine and art room, which probably has 70 or 80 pictures, artifacts that I've collected over the years. And I have a sculpture garden at the back with a stream running through it, where I've got 6 standing sculptures. There's very much wine and art. And art is my other passion. I do mention right at the end of the book that if I had to choose the dominant aspect in my life between wine and art, it would be art rather than wine. Because wine has been a way of life. In my life in wine, I've been in it the whole time. But art is a kind of addictive passion. And so the idea of blending with Bride Valley, the wine and art. So people come here, they see the art immediately. And to me, that's very satisfactory.
Yeah. You mentioned your wine club. Since I'm assuming many of our listeners are from the United States, would it be available to people living here in the U.S.?
Not. We can't with the complications. Yeah. So it's only open to UK residents. Yeah.
Yeah. Your mention of wine and art reminds me of Robert Mondavi. He started COPIA, the American Center for Wine, Food, and the Art. I think his wife Marguerite brought a lot of the art influence into his lifestyle. Did you have many interactions with Robert? And
yes,
I used
to know him really quite well, and Marguerite, and used to spend right from the start. He used to show me, compare his Pinot Noir to Romani Conti and that kind of stuff. He was an amazing man, quite amazing man. In fact, a very nice story. I was at the Napa Valley Wine Auction. This is probably the early 80s. Okay. And the organizers couldn't figure out that. They asked me what I did. And I said I was... I was no longer a wine merchant. So I said I was a wine consultant, but they didn't have any peg for wine consultant. So they said, we'll put you down as journalist. So they gave me a car and a driver, and they sent me off to Phelps for lunch. And then the driver drove me back to the Napa Valley Wine Auction, and I went through it. And as I was leaving, and my car and the driver were ready for me, I saw Marguerite and Robert waiting for a bus. And so I took them back to Mondavi Winery in my car. And at that point, I said, I'm going to be a journalist. This is what happens. This is what I like.
Oh my gosh. That reminds me of a story. I moved to Napa about 21 years ago. And right after we moved here, my daughter, who was probably 7 or 8 at the time, had a soccer match up in St. Helena. So we lived in Napa. We drove up the Silverado Trail up to St. Helena, and it was like 7:30 in the morning because we had an early match that day. Yeah. And I go right by, Robert's the famous Wapo Hill where he lived, and I saw this figure, this kind of white figure up by the road, and lo and behold, as I got closer, it was Robert in his bathrobe picking up his newspaper. And I was so excited, like, there's Robert Mondavi. And then I told one of the Robert Mondavi sales reps the story a couple of weeks later. And she said, oh, yeah, he probably had nothing on underneath. So,
yeah.
No, he was a great man.
The people in the wine trade, well, I mean, I'm talking to, I don't know, you said 600 people. So my theory has always been that the wine is made up of the 3 Ps. The first P is the place where the vineyards are, which is generally pretty good, pretty nice. The second P are the people who either own the vineyards or own the winery or make the wine or are intimately involved in a major way. And so P1 plus P2 equals P3, which is the product. And P3 will tell the story. P3 will tell the story of the place and the people. And to me, wine is all about stories. Wine is all about communication. And it's an agricultural product, but it's an agricultural product leaning immediately into a cultural product. And it's also a convivial product because, you sit around a table drinking wine with your friends and you're chatting, you're talking. The conversation flows. So to have an element that blends a cultural element with a convivial element is really very rare. And it's also very good to drink it. To me, Jancis often comments that one of my faults is that I'm too polite about inexpensive wines. Well, I don't mind. I like wine. I like drinking wine. I've got some wonderful wines in front of me right now, but I don't mind inexpensive wines provided they taste nice because they're wine. And so I have, I have an observation judgment on wine, which is not a critical judgment. I'm probably less critical. Of course, when I'm writing an article, for instance, I have to be precise with my words, but I tend to be less critical than many of my colleagues.
Well said. I think that's probably a great place to unfortunately have to end. If I may, I'm going to add another P, which is pleasure. What a pleasure it has been. Yeah. Truly an honor and a pleasure to be with you today, Stephen. Taste some fabulous wines, to hear your stories. I know we could have gone on a lot longer, but let's plan to do it again in the new year.
We've all got the Valley wines to go back to tonight. So you can have them for lunch and I'll have them for dinner.
We'll do that.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us this week on The Stories Behind Wine. If you would like to suggest an interview subject or show topic, please email us at sbh@napavalleywineacademy.com. Again, that email address is sbh@napavalleywineacademy.com. If you like what you've heard, we hope that you'll visit our website, napavalleywineacademy.com/podcast, and share us with your friends and colleagues. We'd also really appreciate a positive review on iTunes. It really helps out. Be sure to check out the archive section on our website for previous episodes, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at napavalleywineacademy.com. Join us next time for another episode of The Stories Behind Wine. Until then, thank you for listening.